All right, good afternoon, everybody. Yep, hope you enjoyed your lunch, had a little break. We're gonna move this afternoon and talk about a couple of topics of transition services and family engagement, and then also for subpart 2, formal agreements, as we round up the day today. One note, I was actually talking with Ann at lunch and just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview. I probably should have done this to start with, but in terms of the organization of this session, Ann and I were talking about the organization of this session. I know that one of the key questions in any federal program, and certainly with Title I Part D, has to do with allowable use of funds and what are you funding and what are you spending money on. And I don't want to deny it, that is of central importance, and so fully understand that. But as we designed this training, we really wanted to start with the purpose of the program, why you are using your funds ahead of what you are using your funds are. I am a deep believer in the philosophy of funding your plans rather than planning your funds, meaning first figure out what is it that you want to do, what is it that you need to do, and then slot the money in after that, figure out where the money goes, rather than say, okay, we've got $100,000 allocation, let's make a shopping list on what to spend it for. And yes, you want to spend your money. I'm not advocating for leaving money out there. This is money that wants to be spent on students, but working with your schools, with your community, with what your individual needs are, and then spending money on that. So that's kind of how we arranged it and why we started with the purpose, and we'll move forward with that. And it really blends into transition services and family engagement, which we're going to talk about this afternoon. Let me just sort of best practices here. Let me pause for a moment. Is there anything that anybody thought about over lunch that said, I want to go back to something that he said this morning, or something that he said isn't quite sitting right. So let me give a moment. Is there anything that came up from this morning that folks want to revisit? And I'll build in some more time for that. We'll have some more work time also this afternoon, so there'll be other time to ask questions. But want to move next into transition services and family engagement. And this is family engagement is a part of all Title I programs. It's embedded in ESEA programs writ large as an essential part, and not just ESEA programs, but education, educating along with families and engaging families, and talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Transition services is more unique to Title I Part D. I don't want to say totally unique, but more unique to Title I Part D. And with both of these, because of the population of students in Title I Part D, there are some unique characteristics to both transition services and family engagement. We touched on those a little bit this morning, especially in terms of the family engagement. It's a population that sometimes it's difficult to engage with families because of the population being served. And transition is, even talking with some of you, transition is a frequent part of the life of some of these students and families. And so it is because of that that is called out explicitly. And again, I want to put back into the purpose of Title I Part D, which we already looked at, that this number 2 in the bullet points of purpose is to provide such children and youth with the services needed to make a successful transition from institutionalization to further schooling or employment. So transition is a part of the purpose. It's one of the core elements of Title I Part D, and that Congress, as they wrote this law and is being implemented by the Department of Education, recognizes that special part and that specific part of Title I Part D, why transition is so important. This is important. Oops, sorry. This is also important, and now this link comes from NDTAC. They have a transition webpage, which has a lot of good overview information, so I use this. But it is important, and I think everybody knows this, so I don't want to be too obvious, but also don't want to neglect it, that both parts of transition are covered as essential parts of Title I Part D. Both parts of transition, that means supporting students as they move into the juvenile justice system or into child welfare systems, and also out of those systems. And transition is on both sides of that, and really is an ongoing process. Worked with a lot of sort of I think the best practices in the industry are that transition, it's not something you do and stop and then do again, but that it always needs to be in mind in the juvenile justice system, that you're transitioning students in while almost simultaneously preparing them to transition out. Now, I know there are some cases, there's some small and rare cases where there are some students who might not be transitioning out, but for the most part, most students are going to be transitioning in and transitioning out. And so thinking about that transition at both sides of it, and even thinking about the transition out as you are administering the transition in, can really be essential to it. And some of these things, again, I'm going to present some of the best practices, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to share some of those as well and to think about those. None of the, I hope that nothing in some ways, I hope everything I put up here, you're sitting out there, you're saying, yep, that's something, yep, we do that, or yes, we need to work more on that, but I'm not presenting any new concepts. It's not like we have new ideas about how to do successful transition, but doing them well matters, and some of the unique circumstances and individual cases really matters. And then it's also sometimes when you attend things like this, if I am saying things that you're familiar with, it might just be affirmation of what you're doing is the right thing. Oh, it's good to hear that this is what's considered best practice in the field. So I don't expect that I'm going to be presenting some brand new thing. Oh, I've never heard of that, in this bullet. And again, it comes from ND Tech, simple communication and coordination efforts. Well, I've never thought of communication. I mean, this is not anything new that I'm planning to present to you, but hopefully you'll see, yep, that's something that's good. That's something we need to work on. In your head, you might kind of want to categorize things in those buckets. And so again, in transition, these are some of the key concepts which ND Tech has identified: coordination and collaboration, outcome-oriented process. So just like in thinking about the purpose of Title I Part D, what outcomes do we want from this? What does a successful transition look like, again, both into the facility and out of the facility? So what do we want to look like there? And so that you can have successful movement between the facility and the community, that these are not isolated, and they exist together. They're not isolated. It's not just movement into a facility, and then the facility is also part of the community. So you want to make sure that those types of connections remain and are strengthened in your process. Some of the factors to consider, again, and these are things that I'm sure that you take into account, the mental health needs of everybody involved in the system. So that certainly includes the students. It also includes the family. It also includes the staff. And I would say if there's one thing that I think has been emphasized in the last couple of years, the need for mental health support at all three of those levels and more is something that has, I think, even been emphasized in the last 3 years. So mental health for students, for families, and for staff, and attending to those. And so there might be more uses of funds. I know that I've seen that in my role, and probably you in your districts, more funds have been designated to mental health supports than I'd experienced previously in my career. I think we can look back on that and say, boy, we were really missing something 20 years ago. I know I look back on that and think there were some students who really could have used some supports, and families who could have used mental health supports and didn't realize that these funds could be allocated for those purposes. And so that's something else. I don't know how much of it is an issue here. I'm working with some community organizations on mental health supports in other languages. And one of the things about mental health supports is not just writ large, but it's culturally competent mental health supports and linguistically competent. So serving students within their community and families within their community and in their language can make a really big difference. And that makes a big difference in these transitions. Academic needs is something obviously that's critical in transition, and that can include a variety of things, including access to data. One of the things that can be very difficult for transition is when data systems don't speak to each other, and so you don't know where a student, what classes a student has already taken. You don't have the data on where they should be placed and things like that. So the better that systems can talk to each other, the better you are for academic needs. And then something which, again, in the last, I don't know, probably 5 to 10 years, I think has been a growing field of exposure to trauma and trauma-informed care, and being attentive to that. So a child, even a child who's been adjudicated is in the criminal justice system, there's plenty of research, evidence, and anecdote. I don't think it surprises anybody to realize that those students are often have experienced more trauma in their lives. And so treating their needs in transition needs can often, attending to that trauma and being very intentional about it is something that's an essential part of transition services. And you can see this transition services also, I think, just also speaks to a successful program. And these are some of the factors that are going to lead to a successful program. NDTech also has a portion that they talk about in transition services in terms of what types of structures lead to successful transitions. So what can we do that's going to help us to implement these factors and these concepts? How can we do this? So one is building transition teams, which include relevant parties, clearly defining roles and responsibilities. That can also include defining outcomes. That was one of those key factors as well. That includes, and this can be a difficult one and isn't always the easiest, but as much as possible, including the voices and perspectives of youth. So bringing the youth into those types of teams to ask them what do they want, and that's a strategy. Talking to youth, engaging with the youth and with their families. What do you need to help you make a transition is something that's certainly beneficial and recommended as a structure. And that might be something, again, that you've thought about. These are not necessarily easy things to implement. Hopefully we will have some time built in for you to work together, and you might want to ask some of your colleagues, what are ways that you engage youth? How do you do that? Because I find that it's difficult the youth aren't interested in. One of the things I will say this, and this carries over in a lot of different ways, one of the ways that has proven time and time again effective in engaging youth is when youth see that their voices are heard. So when they bring up a concern, and if that concern is addressed, it makes them much more likely to then be willing to engage, because they think, oh, so-and-so listened to me, and they address something. Even addresses doesn't mean that you always have to do everything that a youth says, or meet all of their needs without automatically, but even saying, we can't do that, but I heard you, and here's why we can't do that. Even that type of engagement with the youth can promote further engagement. And so these things can kind of become cyclical and support themselves as they move forward. Second, developing formal processes and procedures through statutes, memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding. That one gets a little bit more technical. I don't know if it's always as effective as including voices and perspective, but I would say it does have something to do, going back to the previous slide, with academic needs and like sharing data. And so if you can build some memoranda of understanding or data sharing agreements between institutions, so that that data can be shared more easily, it can make for more successful transition. And the same thing with effective communication channels, so that agencies can speak to each other. People within those agencies can speak to each other. A lot of times these youth have multiple public service agencies in their lives, from healthcare providers to mental health providers to school systems to criminal justice systems, public defenders, all of those different agencies. And there are sometimes rules on who can talk to who and who can't talk to who. But if at the core of it, kind of going all the way back to our beginning, remember, supporting students was our core purpose. If we have supporting students as our core purpose, having the adults develop systems so that the student purposes are prioritized and centered is something that can be essentially important here. So some of this is summary, but again, building on what are best practices, and this comes from NDTAC. These are some ideas to improve outcomes, including the voice of youth in this, building capacity to measure, analyze, collect, report, and use outcome data to guide ongoing system decisions. And that can be a little bit technical there, but it also makes a difference that you want to see, is there a program that is graduating more kids? Is there an outlier program? If I have five different institutions or 5 different settings in my district, and one of them has a much higher graduation rate than the others, what are they doing differently? And sometimes it's easy to excuse that away, but looking at that data and trying to figure that out, and then assigning your resources and your supervision on those results. And so using the data and the voices of youth, hey, we need more of this, and making those decisions based on that data can be really essential there. All right, and want to make sure that we build in time to have some conversation. So want to have you have some time at your table. And if you also want to, it's also an opportunity if you want to move around. So I'm going to give you, we're going to take about 8 minutes to do this. And so you have time to talk at your table, and then I'll give you a moment if you want to go to a different table just to hear some different ideas, you can do that as well. So think about what strategies have led to successful transition in your programs. Give 8 minutes. Did you pause the recording? Oh, it went sorry, just.
Oh, do you want me to?
No. I just, yeah, just go back here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
All right. Hopefully that was a good opportunity to converse and get some ideas. Anybody have anything that they want to share? Came out of that? Any ideas for successful transitions? You hear anything they hadn't heard before, or get an idea, or anything to share? Even any questions? All right, we can, we're going to get an opportunity to do some more of those, but in combining and the law and the guidance, they do kind of talk about these. I think it's essential to think of transition services and family engagement together. So I want to move on and talk. The next part is about family engagement. And as we talk about family engagement, I think it is important to at least think for a moment about the definition of family. And this is a note from NDTAC's Family Engagement Toolkit, another valuable resource which is in your materials and that I recommend. And I'm going to just read this out because I think that it's important that it says the word family is an inclusive term that includes parents, other family members providing care, legal guardians, and educational surrogate parents. Per the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, an educational surrogate parent is a trained adult whose job is to protect the educational rights of the child and to advocate for and make education decisions in the best interest of the child when a parent or family member is not available or does not have parental rights. And so the purpose of this definition is really to think of family as an inclusive term and not to that it means a variety of people who support those students. And, you know, in talking about the voices of youth, I think it can depend, but sometimes, many times, probably think of some cases where this isn't true, but many times engaging with the youth about who their family is, who they consider their family, can be an important part of that, because who their family is are the people who are going to be supporting them, hopefully supporting them as they transition in and transition out. And so as much as institutions can engage with families, and I know that sometimes that's not always easy, practical, and there's barriers that come up, but engaging with families in a variety of ways really makes a difference. And thinking about families inclusively, and again, who the students consider their family can make a difference. Again, knowing that's not always the easiest thing. This is a definition from the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement of family engagement. And so this definition is not rooted, this is not attached to Title I Part D, but I think that it's important to think about what we mean by family engagement. We're now about 8 years past when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was reauthorized as ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. And one of the technical changes that Congress made in ESSA from No Child Left Behind was that they changed the term from parental involvement to family engagement. And that was both a technical term, you know, in some ways just sort of a grammar difference, but it signified a much more meaningful difference, that this was no longer just about involvement of parents, but engaging families, which means a little bit more, this is the definition, more of a shared responsibility. So acknowledging from both the family side and the school side and community side that this is a collective responsibility, that we're all in this together and we're working together, that it is continuous. So family engagement, and you know, I've been as guilty of this as any other Title I administrator to think of, oh, family engagement. Yep, I did my family engagement. We had an activity night. Family engagement's done. Check off. I'm not proud of that, but have been in that circumstance and not thinking of what family engagement is an ongoing relationship. And that means just as much, I mean, there needs to be formal, intentional plans for family engagement, but it also does mean seeing a family member, a student's family member at the supermarket and saying hello and engaging in conversation, that all of that is part of the continuous role of family engagement. And it kind of goes into that last part, that it's not locational, meaning, and this comes from a specific thing, that there is a lot of research shown that when the only family engagement, or again, previous parental involvement activities that happen are in the schools or in institutional settings, that right away that creates barriers to some families, either in terms of logistics. Physically getting to some of the locations is not easy, and they can't do it on their work time. But it also can have psychological barriers of having families to come engage, especially in institutions where maybe they attended schools and were not successful, or that have pre-existing connotations in families' mind, can be a barrier. And so family engagement should not be contingent. There's also a power dynamic there. And again, hopefully this is not something new, but there's a power dynamic. When the school always requires the family to come to the school, it sends a message about whose time and location is important. And when the school can go out and come to the family, that sends different types of messages. So in thinking about family engagement, shared responsibility, continuous and ongoing, and it is not locational. And I think that those are central and important to ground ourselves in what is best practices in family engagement. In juvenile justice settings, and I don't want to just be in juvenile justice, the same is true in situations where students have been removed from homes for more of the neglect, on the neglected side. On either of those, so I should probably justice, but for family engagement in Title I Part D settings, there are elevated needs and challenges. First of all, on the needs side, there is voluminous research showing how impactful family engagement can be. In fact, if a student has a family member or an adult, somebody in their lives who can be an anchor for when they come back to the home community, they are astronomically more likely to be successful on that return than if they go back and they don't have anybody to engage with. And so if schools can find, and that's why the expansive definition of family is important, if they can find that person or persons, and whether from a church group or from a coach of a team or somebody who can help anchor that child when they get back to their home setting, they're so much more likely to be successful. But the challenges, already discussed some of them, are also voluminous in terms of engaging with families. And don't want to be overly simplistic, but in often cases, contributing factors to why the student is in a N&D facility is because of family members or types of pressures on the family, whether it's intentional or unintentional. But those challenges are real and they exist, and those barriers can be difficult to overcome. But through some of these intentional ways to engage families, some of that can be addressed and can be impactful. I want to have another opportunity, instead of me just talking, but for you to talk. And I think we're going to do a little bit shorter here and then have some group discussion about what challenges and successes have you experienced regarding family engagement. So we're going to take let's break it up into half. We're going to do another 8 minutes, but we'll do 4 minutes for table talk and then 4 minutes for whole group time on challenges and successes. So I'm going to give you some time at your tables. Take about 30 seconds to wrap up. All right, and as we come back together as a large group, we start out, we'll go in order and maybe back and forth. I don't know, we'll see how many we have. Anybody willing to share a challenge regarding family engagement, something that's especially challenging? You know, that's a great question. I would actually say it's really a part of all three pieces, in that if you think about kind of going back to, oh, actually, no, that was transition with, I thought I had the slide on academics, but the family engagement piece of it can be important for academics, math, and family engagement. I think it's a little bit more holistic part of the child, but it's a really good point. I guess for purposes of this discussion, it's tied to the transition services, in that that's how Ann and I, when we were talking about it, we said transition and family engagement coming together, even though the reason the application is written by that is the purpose of the law explicitly says that transition needs to be a part of it. And actually, I would hope that something that Congress would do when they reauthorize is intentionally put family engagement into the transition session. They did not do that. I think the best practices are trying to get at that point, even though it's not exactly there. So that's a really good question. And apologies for my stumbling over the answer a little bit. Yes.
Family engagement activities or to provide examples and training?
I think the more that the district can do for that, yes, absolutely. And many of you, virtually all of you raised your hand for other programs. You know, especially when we get into it like this type of slide, Title I Part A has family engagement. These are Title I Part A. This is not just to Title I Part B. So if it's part of your job, it can be part of your broader job of authentic family engagement. I would say that definitely. I think I saw a hand over here. Yes, please. Yes.
Generally don't supervise visits.
Yes.
I have, we stay out. There's too much, we stay out of it. So is this a requirement? Or is this just something that, like you said, was just good practice? Is this something that the State Department's gonna be wanting to see in NND now? Is a family engagement component? I guess.
For the application now, it does mention family engagement. I'm looking for that answer right now. It's in the application.
And while Ann's looking at that part, let me give a little bit of a different way to think about that, because I think, you know, that is on the challenge side of it. And I absolutely hear that. And I think that's a real thing, is how much did the immediate family maybe contribute to this youth? One of the things kind of going back, and this is why I think it also connects with transition. Remember, one of the points in transition was about listening to the voice of youth. And the expansive definition of family. So one thing that I would offer as a possibility is there a positive family influence in that youth's life who might be able to engage with that youth in a way that the traditional family or a more narrow definition of family might not do so. And I'm actually thinking, you know, get real anecdotal. I want to be careful about anecdotal evidence, but had the opportunity this summer to attend the wedding of a former student. And one of the reasons that the student was able to graduate from high school and college was because of the involvement of not a formal adoption, but a family that he almost adopted a family of his own and was able to build those connections and look to that family for guidance and for and so while they would not have made a legal definition of family, this was the student's choice. And so, you know, what role does the school or the institution have in that? Sometimes I would say, again, going back to the transition, is listening to the voice of the student and saying, look, if I'm going to be successful, this is somebody I need in my life to be there, then you might need to take that into account. And because, you know, there's different considerations and might need to make sure that that is actually a responsible person who can have some, who there are not additional barriers from that person. But so I know that's anecdotal and it might be a little bit convoluted, but listening to the voice of the youth about who can be powerful in that person's life can sometimes make a difference. And I don't know if you have anything yet about the application. Okay, we will come back to that one as we get into transition.
Just finding ways to facilitate as they were ways to engage the family as students are coming into the facility as well as.
It is I will say, it is definitely not, Title I Part A, you have to have an annual meeting where you need your sign-in sheets and seeing heads nod. I'm sure you've all been there. This is not that type of requirement. This is not, I'm not going to speak exactly for South Carolina, but that's not a part of the application. So it's not that level, but I think a little bit more on the best practices and who you can find there.
Because like our facilities, they have one time. So we don't communicate with the cottage families, the people who care in each cottage for the children. If we have something that's showing up, we contact that one point, and that's what they want you to contact. They want that person to be your contact. And then in turn, that person communicates with their cottage parents because they rotate. So I think you have to look at the individual set up a facility because they don't want us contacted directly with the cottage. And there's reasons for that.
Yeah, and that makes, so do you have built-in, sorry, I don't mean to, but like, then transition, like, so is that person also the transition contact? And so that person, because you need to be able to coordinate with that person for successful transitions. Is that how it operates? Sure. Yeah, confidentiality is definitely something, and right, sharing information, right, and just, yes, is absolutely important and needs to be sensitive and held and all of that.
Parent engagement, a description of how the program will involve parents in efforts to improve the educational achievement of their children, assist in dropout prevention activities, and prevent the involvement of their children into delinquency. I think not your role to go out and provide these activities, but to assist the center or facility in how they can engage the parents and with those transition services.
So like in that area in cashiers, what I just described that happens at our facility, I write in there that way because that's just the way that facility works. So that's what I always include in that section, how that setup works for that particular.
Here's one, it says two-way communication between guardians and tutor mentor will be utilized throughout the instruction.
So, right, and if there's anything more, you might say that this is what the district does, and then here's what the institution does. So you can also do it that way, right? Because a lot of these best practices, I mean, you can definitely take these are, actually the first bullet here, a shared responsibility involving schools and other community agencies. So it is that collaborative effort and not just one or the other. That's also in the transition, is having institutions speak to each other makes a difference in the students' lives. And so definitely not saying to rework that, but that if everybody's on the same page and communicating intentionally and openly can definitely make a difference there. Any other challenges, successes, comments, or questions?
Agencies or personnel that we can use in the sense of family. It presents more opportunities now that we can discuss with the facility.
Thanks. And, I think also, again, connecting different things, talked about data. One of the things is if you find data points that show that, okay, the traditional family isn't working for this student, or, students in these types of circumstances, but these types of larger, broader definition family are, then that also, because what we want is students to be successful. And again, if you can show a data, hey, look, this kid was way off track and got on track and graduated from high school, those things make a difference and can be used to kind of perpetuate your program. So the more that you can do that, the better. All right, we are going to we're going to do a activity, a family engagement toolkit activity. Just see what I have here. Sorry. So, oh yeah, for subpart 2. So this is going to be, sorry, I had to go ahead. So a family engagement toolkit subpart 2 has developed, and this might be some tools which might help you and help you to work with your institutions. This is, they divided, you have a link to this. This also, you know what, I just saw, is this the same? This has some definition of family engagement, but again, it's a little bit of a broader family members here, and so uses this definition. Yep, here it is. Throughout the toolkit, the word family is an inclusive term, so I was just confirming that it has that same definition there. This toolkit is interesting because, and hopefully will be of value to, because it has 2 different sections designed to help you. So the first 4 tools are tools for families. So a sample letter to parents, a contact list template, sample education questionnaire and cover letter for families, and a family tip sheet. So those are tools that are designed to be given to families. And so that's something there. And then tools 5 through 7 are tools for facilities, something that you can help with your facilities for facility staff. So faculty and staff tip sheet on engaging families. So so you had a family tip sheet, now a faculty and staff tip sheet. So you can see kind of the connection there. There's a facility self-assessment tool. So the facility can use to evaluate how well they're doing with family engagement, and a family engagement planning tool. And so, it's got a variety of tools in this. This is now about a year old. I think that it has some really rich and valuable resources, and want to give you some time to work on it. And so the activity for the next, we're going to take 30 minutes to do this for subpart 2, is to review the family engagement toolkit. If you have the materials, if you have any of these things, compare them to the templates and consider revisions. If you do not have them, consider adopting them for their use. I will say this family engagement toolkit is presented as a PDF. You'll see it as a PDF. That's how it came from NDTAC. And I don't know if there's the possibility of, if anybody needs these in a Word format or a format that's editable, it's probably something that we could get from NDTAC and make NDTAC's, I'm looking at AM, but they're usually pretty responsive to requests like that. And so I think that's something we could do if needed, but you might be able to adapt those materials and use on your own, but they're good materials. So again, there's 7 tools. The first 4 are for families, and the second 4 are for facilities. What we're going to do, subpart 2 is going to work through that family engagement toolkit now. And again, it's a family engagement toolkit, but think about transition, because transition is really a part of that. So think about that as you're going through. I'm going to connect with subpart 1 because there's actually some additional subpart 1 transition requirements. And so connect with that. And then we're going to take 30 minutes. So the time here is going to be off. We're going to meet back here at 2:40. I'm going to give you, yep, so we'll get 30 minutes. At 2:40, we'll come back for subpart 2 formal agreements. I'll be here, but subpart 2 can work at your tables and come back at 2:40. I can probably change those times here. Any questions about that? I'll put that back up on, yeah, we can pause. Just going to change the time here. Actually, we're going to go 2:45. That time is cleaner. So 2:45.
The Word document back up in case any. Oh, is your name?